Hi, everybody. This is Jim Saffron with Pure Vintage Media, and welcome to our podcast interview. Recently, I spent some time with John Thomas, a professor of law at Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut. John wrote a wonderful book called Kalamazoo Gals, and it chronicles the untold story of the women who built some of the finest guitars that Gibson ever manufactured, all the way back in World War II. John's a wonderful storyteller, and I think you're going to like this interview. So now, John Thomas, Kalamazoo Gals. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Pure Vintage Media. This is really a special interview for me. This is John Thomas, who has written a wonderful book, among everything else that John's done in his life and his career, written a wonderful book called Kalamazoo Gals. And I must say, the last time I used the term gal, I was chastised by somebody saying, "You can't use that word." I think it was my daughter. I said, "Listen, I was born in 1955. Please forgive me. You know, I still have liberal roots and all that."
Well,
But
it's a pleasure
go
to
ahead.
be here. Let me tell you how I came by that title of the book.
Yeah.
For the viewers or listeners who don't know, the book is about the women who built Gibson guitars during World War II, a story the company covered up and I discovered myself. Anyway, these women went into the factory in January 1942 in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the number one song on the hit parade, as they called it in those days in America,
Kalamazoo.
was "I've Got a Gal in Kalamazoo," the Glenn Miller version. So I got a book title. Yeah, I had to
And
call it Kalamazoo Gals.
and after reading the book, I can tell you not one of those women would have objected to you calling them a gal. So
Right.
it's a matter of
Yeah.
age. Anyway, so yeah, great intro, wonderful book. All 386 pages. The truth is, it's very popular. It would have taken me 3 or 4 weeks to get a copy, even on Amazon. So I ended up doing the Kindle version and read it probably in 3 days and from front to back, and just a wonderful telling. Your style, John, is interesting in that you did go for the backstories, and you got to know the ones that had still survived. You learned a lot about them, and I was pleasantly surprised that most of them said, "You want to know about me?" They were very humble, very and most of them, I think that whole Midwest thing, a tad suspicious of who is this guy from Connecticut. But in the end, you want them all over, and you just, you know, going to the luncheon, going to the Kalamazoo house, having those people participate in it. Tell me, it was wonderful. Tell me
Thank you.
how it began with a photograph, did it not?
Yeah, I say the predecessor to the photograph was professional boredom, which really what motivated me to do this. My day job, I'm a law professor. This is my last academic year. I turned 70 last March, and I'll be 71
Mm,
next March. That's how it works, apparently. And I'm going
congratulations.
to retire. But I've done a lot of writing. I've got a couple hundred publications, about half in academic spheres and half elsewhere, lay literature, I call it. But I got really, I maybe jaded is the right word, but at least bored writing the academic stuff because the publishers have an expectation, and I
Mm,
didn't really want to have that sort of cramped style. But in addition, it's a self-contained body of literature, right? The only people who read it are people who write it. And so I started freelancing articles for music magazines, guitar mostly. And at first I gave them away for free. And then people would commission me to write articles. And I got to find my voice in a different context. And in the course of that, one of the projects, I don't know what I was writing, but I came across this photograph of about 70 women, thereabouts, standing in front of the Gibson Guitar Factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And there are only women there. Now, I couldn't decide exactly when it happened. I'm not too good with hairstyles, but it looked like 30s, 40s, 50s. Later on, one of the women in that photograph gave me an original print from it's June 1944. That's the photograph. And I just became kind of obsessed about it, I think, just wondering why those women were there. There were two histories, published histories. The one was by a group of guys, three guys, who wrote a book in the mid 1980s called Gibson's Fabulous Flat Top Guitars. And it has a chapter on World War II era guitars, a pretty short chapter, because most people thought there weren't very many built and that they were
mm,
great guitars. So the line in this book was that Gibson only built a few guitars during World War II, but they were fantastic because only the seasoned craftsmen stayed back. The young guys went off to war. and the seasoned craftsmen had greater skills, and so these were extraordinary guitars. Makes perfect sense. But two things. One, I'm looking at this photograph. There's no craftsmen. There may be craftswomen. In addition, um, the fellow who wrote the Gibson story history, published in the mid 1970s, Julius Belson, he also was the personnel director from the late 1930s until after the war. So he hired everybody who went in that factory during World War II. He published this history of Gibson, in which he said Gibson did not build any musical instruments during the war whatsoever. All their energy went to war efforts.
Mm.
So I've got these two stories. One is some people who know the vintage guitar community and history really well, so trustworthy source. The other is the inside source who's saying no guitars. And so I keep looking at this photograph. And at one point, my wife said, "You're going to have to go try to find one of these people." And that's what I did. And I got lucky in that that slice of the demographic didn't move much. I took out an advertisement in the Kalamazoo Gazette and also in the newspapers of the contiguous towns, the little towns all around Kalamazoo. And I called up the Kalamazoo Gazette and said, "I'm going to put an ad, try to find people and have them meet me. What's the day for the highest circulation?" Well, it was the day when there were coupons for the supermarket, right? So whatever that was, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, I took out an advertisement. It appeared every week or maybe twice every week for, I mean, 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. And it just said, "I'm a guy from Connecticut, coming to town," writer, I think I said, "coming to town, want to know if anybody, talk to anybody who worked at the Gibson factory during World War II." And this is, that was probably 2007. I started this project a long time ago. It took me a long time to finish it. And so this is pre-social media, at least pre-social media for me. And so I just put the advertisement out there, hoping somebody would contact me. And 12 people contacted me. Now, usually it wasn't the woman herself. Usually it was a daughter or granddaughter.
Yeah.
I said, "I'm coming to town." I got these 12 contacts. And the contacts fell into two categories. Right? Some people, some of the women, just gave me their address. Come over, I set up the visit, and I would just pull up to their house and talk to them. But the others, I think, I think the wiser group wanted to meet me, but in a well-lit public place, right? They weren't going to
Yeah.
let me come to their house. And so I'm trying to figure out what do I do with these folks? I'm thinking they're going to be 80s or 90s. The youngest I met was 84. The oldest was 97.
Mm.
Um, there's one still alive. She turns 104 January 30th of next year. Uh, I'm just trying to figure out how does this guy who just going to try to walk into their life. And I wanted to find a place to stay in Kalamazoo, and there was a bed and breakfast called the Kalamazoo House, so I had to stay there. Turns out it was a beautiful old structure, and the proprietors at that time, still lovely proprietors. Proprietors at that time had become really good friends. They've since sold it, and they had just bought it. And I phoned, and they got it from the cell phone. They're out for a bike ride or something, and I was just making this whole thing up. I want to do an afternoon tea, and the proprietress said, "Oh yeah, we could do an afternoon tea." Turns out neither of us had any idea what we were talking about. Um, but we put together this afternoon tea, mainly Laurel Parrott put together finger sandwiches, which turns out aren't made of fingers. Who knew that, right? Finger sandwiches and sort of stuff that would make sense for people of this age, people who came of age during World War II, say. And it turned out just to be a life-changing experience, both talking to women in their own homes and then having this Sunday afternoon tea. It just was extraordinary. I knew I'd fallen into something. What it was, I didn't know. I didn't know it was going to be a book. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I did not have a book contract at the time. I was just wandering around, uh, following, I guess, my heart really. A story that turns out had what most everything I like about it in life. It's got music, especially guitars, right?
Right.
And it's got a mystery. It's got some history and some social justice because this women's work had just been completely erased by the company. So I got this story that just changed my life in all kinds of ways. I put my heart and soul into the book, but it also led to people contacting me. "Would you come talk about the book?" I think the first one was the arts community, the Arts Commission in Kalmar, Sweden. Apparently, every town in Sweden has an arts commission.
Yeah.
Contacted me and asked me what it would take for me to get me to come to Kalmar to talk. And I said, "Well, expenses, my costs," thinking they're going to say, "Yeah, right." They said,
Right.
"Fine." So, that started. I went there. I did all the European guitar festivals, other events. BBC did an hour radio documentary with the BBC studios in London. It just took me both figuratively and literally. This book took me all over the world.
Did a lot of these women seem to, from the dialogue in the book, it seemed to have adopted you like a long lost son? Probably because you took so much interest in their lives, not just the history of Gibson, but you wanted to know more about him. And I got from reading the book, I got the feeling that you were really touched by that there was a human factor to all this. It wasn't just there is a great conspiracy story here that we'll get to, but
Right.
it's just amazing that you touch these women and when I think about it, they're in their 80s and their 90s, and here's somebody that wants to know about their life. That must have been very touching for them.
Yeah, and touching for me. You're exactly right. So 201, the women said, I don't know why you care. No, I don't know why anybody would care. But 8 of the 12, maybe 9 of the 12, had a treasure trove of memorabilia from that time.
Yeah.
Clippings, newspaper clippings, original strings, couple tools, things like that. They brought out in that photograph. It was as though they hoped that someday somebody would care, right? And I came and I cared. Now, I was very careful. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have been this careful not to take what those trinkets, items of memorabilia. And of course, when the women died, it all just got thrown out. I should have taken it all.
Oh,
But I just didn't want to be imposing. But yeah, it
right.
touched me in all kinds of ways. I mean, part of it was that I gave me a second chance to ask about that time period. So my parents lived through that time period. They were fairly young. And, as a teenager, especially, I figured if my parents had experienced it, how cool could it be? Right. I
Yeah.
just didn't take the time to ask them much about it. And so I got a second chance, really. Right. And by that time, both my parents were dead. And it was sort of a second personal chance to get a piece of history that I should have gotten from my own family. Um, and also, I get a window into this factory that time period had been completely covered up by the Gibson
Yeah.
company. So yeah, it was touching in all kinds of ways, just amazing ways. And I still talk to the woman who's going to be 104. She calls me her spirit
Her name
son,
was, which one was that?
Irene. Irene.
Irene. Okay, yeah, you spent a lot of
Yeah.
time on Irene.
Well,
The
Irene turned out to be my buddy in partner in crime, if you will. She did a lot
right,
of live interviews with me on radio, television, that sort of
wonderful.
thing.
Oh my gosh, yeah, people, it, it, I still freak out a little bit. You and I are really close in age. I was born in April, so I'll be 71 in April, and we were born 10 years after the end of World War II. That's
Yeah.
when you live through the 70s and you're going, it's 1970, and you're going, gosh, that's only what, 25 years after World War II. Now 25 years goes by like that, and it's amazing how you don't really appreciate that until you're much, much older.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I sometimes have this regret that I didn't start writing the book 10 years earlier because the more people would have been alive. But
sure,
but I did get there just in time,
brother,
for reasons
you
I'll never quite,
did pretty well. Yeah.
I did pretty
So
well, I think, considering. Yeah.
yeah, you did very well. Okay, so you're looking at this picture. This could be the opening of aside from the documentary that was done, this could be just a wonderful movie where every day you're at your desk writing about law and other things, writing for fretboard and you're looking at this picture and you're just like fascinated by it. So, um,
Well, I mean, to interrupt you,
yeah, please.
it looks like it will become a movie, a scripted
Is it?
feature as a movie. People, yeah, I'm
Is that
meeting,
going to happen?
yeah, I signed with the film production company in Hollywood. I'm going to meet
Outstanding.
them in a couple of weeks. I can't disclose details, but I will be able to
Yeah.
soon. Um, a small, a new company formed by relatively young people who left bigger production companies and formed their own
Wow.
company. And so I
Well,
meet with them. I've been talking off and on for some months. I meet with the principals of that company in 2 weeks in LA.
Well, I'm going to put my marker in for when that happens, that we have another podcast interview, if that'd be okay with
Sure,
you.
sure. Oh yeah,
Okay.
sure. Yeah,
All
of
right.
course. Yeah,
So, So I don't think I didn't know this. The war effort, World War II. First off, the prehistory of all this was great because it filled in a lot of gaps in what I knew about Gibson. And Orville turned out to be a very sad character, and I never realized that.
Yeah.
He had a tough life in a lot of ways, and it was interesting how you dug up a scattered history, but one that was also contradictory in a lot of ways. Well, when was
Right.
he?
So,
Yeah,
when was he born? I don't late
no, but
born.
yeah, what
Oh,
I
go
meant
ahead.
was
Yeah,
you ran into all kinds of like contradictions, and you said, "Geez, what's the truth here? Did he move back to New York, or was he in an insane asylum?" Just a fascinating history. Um,
yeah.
but
So I can tell you this, when I started writing the book, I couldn't figure out where to start. And I
yeah,
thought, well, I need to start how Gibson Company landed there in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And it had to do with Orville Gibson, who founded the company. And I did a little research best I could, found census reports and stuff. But I hired a genealogist to track Orville through through the
right.
internet, if you will. And she had much greater skills in that kind of endeavor than I. Yeah, and find this, I call him like a streaking comet. This
Mhm.
brilliant guy who comes flying fast through the sky and burns
Nice
everybody.
analogy.
He
Yeah.
la- he lands in Kalamazoo, Michigan, gets an apartment above a shoe repair shop, starts building guitars, to generate some interest. Investors create the Gibson Mandolin and Guitar Company. It was called originally Mandolin's First. Um, he he signs on in a sort of advisory position. It's not building anymore, and he takes his stock. He gets stock in the company, and he traded his stock to settle his bar tab in the bar across the street from the apartment he rented. And then he moved back to upstate New York, where he had come from, and spent his last years in a mental institution. Yeah, died in a mental institution. So this uh, wildly interesting, short-lived figure, and just the photographs we have of him. We have only a couple, and he's
Yeah.
dressed in the most outrageous style as you can imagine.
He was a
Um,
dandy, wasn't he? Yeah.
he was a dandy. Yeah, so that was another just gift to me, right? I wonder, how did this start? It turns out it's fascinating, and there are
Yes.
contradictions. Some people claim this, some people claim that. The reason he apparently, best I can figure, the reason he and I was the first person to look into this. No one else cares, right? But he moved from New York to Michigan because he was following a brother. A brother had gone moved first. Yeah, that was another fun discovery. This wildly interesting character with a sad character, right?
Yeah, well, it really isn't much different than founders of current companies, tech companies, exiting early and then somebody else takes it over. Uh, uh, and it's very common. That's the world that I came from. And they know how to start a company, but they don't know how to run a company. And a lot of times that has to be handed over to somebody that's got more business sense. Um,
Right.
so I guess, is it Lloyd Lohr that took over at that point? Do I have the history right?
Well, Lloyd Lohr came probably about 10 years after Orville left.
Okay,
Orville left early 19, well, maybe 20 years. Well, almost 20 years. We know Lloyd Lohr landed in Gibson early 1920s. Those
okay,
first Lohr mandolins are 23, 24, something like
right.
that. And so Lloyd Lohr came in as an acoustic engineer, designer. Um, I think what happened really is that the company had gone as far as it could really with Orville's original vision of how musical instruments should look and sound. And
Right,
Lohr came in and essentially next is an evolutionary step. But we got those great, of course, the mandolins and the Lohr signed L5s, other
right.
instruments. Yeah, so Lohr was the next major step into Gibson history.
Okay, so let's like move forward a little bit to World War II. Gibson is known for making guitars, musical instruments. Um, and then the heavy hand of government says everybody's going to be retooling here. And it wasn't just Gibson, automotive companies, um, IBM, number of industries had to, quote, retool for the war. And was that the War Board? Do I have that right?
Well,
Company that
yeah, first
oversaw
let's
that?
so
Please.
Gibson did not have to retool. There were only
Okay.
certain companies that had to. So FDR, right after the war, right, we get bombed December 7th, 1941, December 8th, 1941, we declare war both on Japan and on Germany. And FDR needs to convert the economy from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy
Okay.
and does it in just astonishingly quick fashion. And the chief component of that was something called the War Production Board. So FDR appointed captains of industry, the head of GE and other companies were put on this board to manage the economy. And the board had regulation authority, could issue regulations, but had the force of law. So some companies were dramatically affected. Singer sewing machines shut down because all the metal that went into sewing machines could be used for military applications. Um, Columbia Records, same thing. Steinway Piano, because that soundboard has a lot of metal. So
Mm.
those companies had to retool. In June 1st, 1943, I know the date, War Production Board had issued a directive order before that, an order that went into effect that day that stringed instruments could have no more than 10% of their components of metal, 10% weight of metals. So Gibson had to eliminate the metal truss rod. The tuning machines were coin thin, thinner than a dime. But Gibson was well within its rights to build guitars during the war, and we know that Gretsch did, and we know that Martin did, and they never covered it up, but they weren't having women build them. Gibson, though, did do a lot of war work. Gibson was one of the very few companies to receive 3 E for Excellent awards, the
Mm.
government praising the company. And Gibson, of
Okay.
course, could do woodwork. They built the pontoons for amphibious aircraft, but they were early into electric guitars, so they could build radio and radar components. One of the
Interesting.
things I like to think about is it's pounding plowshares, plowshares into swords, right? The reverse. There was that metal truss rod was a perfect size for a component in a 50 caliber machine gun.
Isn't that
So Gibson
amazing?
did a lot of war work, but also continued to make instruments, although denied doing it. And it wasn't because they were banned from doing it. Again, Martin and Gretsch just built the guitars and never said they weren't building it. Gibson, for reasons I'm confident I know why. Gibson denied making the guitars, hid that.
Gibson, Gretsch and Martin weren't as involved in providing materials for the war like Gibson was.
They were not. They did not
Okay.
do that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do find it interesting. Um,
So, okay, so there's a shortage of materials that can be made in the truss rod. I always wondered why some of those banners did not have truss rods.
yeah.
And I guess did most of them? Yeah, some of them did
Well,
towards the
yeah,
end.
most of it, almost that order lasted almost precisely a year. So from
Yeah,
mid 1943 to mid 1944, those guitars do not have metal truss rods. What they have in the neck is a V-shaped wedge of maple running the full length of the neck instead of the metal truss
got it.
rod. At the same time, Martin used a ebony bar in their models during
Right.
the war.
I've seen some of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so who was the? You talked about Julius, and I do have that pamphlet book. I think it's a reprint, but it's a
Yeah.
fascinating read. He seemed to wanted to alter history a little bit or rewrite it. Who's
He did.
if you had to pick not a villain, but who's the dark star there? Was it Gary Hart? Was it Julius? Was it the combination? Tell that what made
Yeah,
them
so
all
let me identify the name. So the
okay.
CEO at the time was Guy Clark. But no, not
Guy
Guy
Clark.
Clark. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Pardon?
I thought it was Clark, but Gary Hart. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's Guy Hart. Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
So I got confused with the musician. Anyway,
Okay.
the president, I think, was complicit, right? He had to approve all the advertisements that went out that said we're not building any musical instruments till the boys come home.
Yeah.
But he also appeared before the War Production Board and stated to the War Production Board, complained, one, quote, my company's been run almost completely by women, and two, I can't keep up with the demand for guitars, including from soldiers. So he's saying this to the War Production Board, but at the same time, he's approving advertisements that say we're not building any instruments.
Interesting.
Now, Julius Belson was the historian who wrote that book, published that book in the mid 1970s, but he also was personnel director, and he revisionist history. He wrote that as soon as the Gibson entered the war, we entered the war, the U.S. entered the war. As soon as that happened, Gibson put aside instrument building, repaired a few. That's all it did early on. Didn't build any instruments, and put all of its efforts toward the war. So the only explanation I can see, because Gibson was well within his rights to do it. And of course, again, Martin and Gretsch were building guitars. Gibson didn't want the public to know that women were making the guitars. Didn't believe the buying public would, men typically, right, would buy guitars made by women. So covered that story up. So, but I didn't know any of this. All I have is this hint in the Fabulous Flat Tops book that maybe some instruments issued during the war. And then this denial that there were any instruments built during the war. And so I find these women, I find 12 of them, and I start to ask them what they did. And the second woman I interviewed, first woman I interviewed, never forget this. I guess it's like it happened yesterday. I fly into Kalamazoo, rent a car, drive to her house, Jenny Snow. And if anybody's familiar with the famous photograph, she's in the front row, about the fifth from the far right. And she
Hmm.
identified herself because she had a flower in her hair. I always wore a flower in my
Right.
hair. I roll up to her house, right? And I stop the car and I think, what the hell am I going to do? What the hell am I doing here? What am I going to ask these people? I got no plan. I just found these, I identified these people, said, yeah, they're willing to talk to me. What am I going to do? And so I sat in the car for a while. I opened the door to get out, and she then was in her 80s. She's got her arms crossed. She's leaning against the side of the house. She had exited the screen door. She said to me, I thought you'd never get out of that car. Now come on in, Sonny. Second woman, but she made strings. She could say, yeah, we
Right.
made guitars, but she wasn't involved in guitar making. The second woman I interview, I drive from Jenny's house to the next house, and the woman told me she didn't want to meet with me. I call her up on my cell phone, my flip phone, right? Call her up, and she says, I say, I'm coming over. No, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. So I say, "Look, I just want to come by and shake your hand. That's all. That's all I do. I'm told it would have been a good door-to-door salesman. That's what door-to-door
Yeah,
salesmen
right.
did.
Right.
So I show up, and she opens the door just wide enough to stick her hand out, right, to shake my hand. And I shake it, and then she says, "Oh well, come on in." And she was a guitar inspector,
Hmm.
and she started in 1942. She worked to 1944,
And
45.
this was
Just
and this was who?
um, I'm forgetting her name right now. It'll
Oh,
come
I'm
to me.
sorry. I mean,
No, it's a cool name. I have the book right behind me. I'll look it up.
okay.
And she's the second interviewee in the book. In any event, she said, "Well, what was your job?" "Well, I was a guitar inspector." So
Wow.
this is the first confirmation I have that they made guitars, right?
Yeah.
And, and I said, "Well, how many inspectors were there?" "Just me." And I
Oh,
say, "Hang on for a second. I have something in the car you've seen before." And I had this Southerner Jumbo SJ, a very
mm,
minty one. Of course, I still got it. In a lot of ways, it's the guitar that sent me on that journey, and brought it into her house and had her re-inspected, and it passed. Now, if you know
thank
anything
God.
about Gibson, if you think anything about Gibson, no guitar failed inspection.
Yeah, right.
So she would tell. I said, "Well, how did this work? Did you know how to play guitar?" "No." "What did you do?" "I just looked at the guitar, and if it looked something a little weird, I put it in the reject side of the room. We had, guitar stands on one side of the room and the other side. Good ones went on one side, and the rejects went on the other side. And usually it was like a blemish in the wood or something like that." I
Right.
said, "Then what happens?" She said, "My boss would come in at the end of the day and go to the reject pile and say, 'Oh hell, these are just fine,' and put them in the pile to send them out." So I passed twice, but no guitar failed inspection during that time.
Right.
But this was
Isn't that
this was my
funny?
first inclination. I ended up meeting three women who worked on guitars. I sensed met a fourth at post the book. But so about a quarter of the women I talked to worked on guitars. And I think that's probably accurate. I tell people what I have is a jigsaw puzzle of Gibson during World War II. And I have about a quarter of the pieces, maybe a third, right? I don't know
Right.
exactly what happened. If I'd gotten there 10 years earlier, right? But I get women to tell me they made guitars. And so there've been guitars coming out. But what I want to confirm, I want confirmation from Gibson, and they aren't talking to me. And I heard about these mythological shipping ledgers, right? There's all this murmuring back then that Gibson had shipping ledgers. I thought if I can get a hold of those shipping ledgers, well, I'll know, right? I can find out what shipped. And especially in the Les Paul community, right? However many, I always say of the 3,000 1959 Les Pauls ever made, only 6,000 still exist, right? But anyway, there was a lot of talk. Someone had seen these ledgers, and I met other people who had claimed to have seen these ledgers. I wanted to get a hold of ledgers. And I bet it was a year, maybe longer. I started with customer service that told me no, worked my way up to the executive assistant to Henry Jeskowitz, then the president of Gibson. Each time I was told, look, we're a privately held company. We don't owe you anything. You couldn't see them if we had them, but we don't have any ledgers. And I just about given up when I got an email from a friend who said, just met this nice person at Gibson. I used to not reveal his gender, but it's been long enough now. He seems like a nice guy. Why don't you contact him? So I email him. He's an executive at Gibson at the time. I email him, and within minutes, no more longer than half an hour, he responds and says, "I don't think so. I'll go look." And again, about 15 minutes later, he says, "I got a book right here. Open it up. It's dated 1938. Says we shipped a guitar to Les Paul on this day. There's a whole stack of these."
Wow.
So the next day, I think it was 2 days later, I'm in Nashville. I went to the corporate headquarters in Nashville. I got to take advantage of this, right? Fly in, got to take advantage of this, and I get a tour in the corporate building. Walking down a hallway, open the closet that's filled with cleaning supplies, all the caustic chemicals, and on the floor in the corner, a stack of these leather-bound books, these ledgers, just decaying. Right, the leather's cracked, pages are falling out. They're just sitting there, and I scoop up from the very first I could get. I got 1936, 35 supposedly exists somewhere, 36 through 46. I got 10 years worth
Mm,
of them. Now,
beautiful.
I should have looked for 1959. It turned
Yeah.
out but that one disappeared for a long time. Gibson now has it back, but I didn't take it. Um,
Yeah. Now it's in
and
a glass case somewhere,
it's
probably.
in a glass case. Yeah, yeah. I wish I looked for it. Look for it then. Anyway,
Yeah.
I get set up in an office. Somebody's been fired or quit from Gibson. I get set up in a corner office when somebody got fired. I'm told this is yours for the next however long you need it. But if Henry, the CEO, comes in, don't just close the door and don't come out. So whoever gave me access didn't want Henry to know. Um, I could tell you this, that Henry did come in while I was there, and the way somebody alarmed, notified the community is it literally true. A guy comes running down the hallway saying, "The fucking assholes here." Anyway, he was not a well-loved president of the company, of the absolute term. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I get these ledgers, right? And I'm going to write down, see if there are any guitars or musical instruments shipped. And there's just pages upon pages. So instead of trying to tabulate, I photograph them. Now,
Yeah.
I first went there for one day. My great friend Willie Henkes, who builds
From
guitars,
Germany.
retired
Hmm.
in Germany. Yeah, Blaser and Henkes guitars. He came with me because he knew more about the details of guitars than I did. And then he left, and my sister flew in. We spent a day or two going through that. I spent several days doing this. So many. There's pre-phones, pre-good pre-cameras on cell phones. I have a little point and shoot, and I remember my finger cramping up because I'm trying to take pictures as fast as I can. I took pics. It was
You're
4,000
like a
pages, something like
spy
that.
in World War II with the Monox camera.
Exactly,
Boom, 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 boom.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone's going to break in the office and say you can't do this. I got to get them fast. So my hand would cramp up. I'm just turn the page. 4,400 pages. 4,400 pages of these things,
Wow.
which is amazing. And then I went back home and counted them. I've counted about 9,100 flat top guitars, just
Mm.
over 9,100.
In that war period.
And then just during the war period, right? And
Right.
then I counted a total of about 25,000 instruments. That includes mandolins,
Right.
violins, banjos, other things. So it goes from we made no instruments during the war to
Yeah.
25,000 instruments. Now that's a serious cover up.
And those
So another,
ledgers, the photographs you have of those ledgers, I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. They're writing in the columns, they're scribbling things out. It's different people, putting their notations in. It must have been difficult to read through all that.
Well, it was really hard. And yeah, talk about eye strain, but exciting, right? I've got this
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
window into this crazy myth. Um, yeah, I also solved a question of Gibson's numbering system. So Gibson guitars back then, only the highest end models got serial numbers. They were
Right.
arch tops. And at one point, Nick Lucas flat tops, but they weren't built during the war. Every other guitar just got a factory order number, which is a batch number. And
Right.
so if your order number is 3000-15, there'll be 3000 will be stamped, and then it'll be hand signed 15. And that means your guitar is the 15th guitar in that batch, number 3000. But the numbers didn't appear to be in numerical order to me. I just couldn't figure this out. So I interviewed the woman whose job was to write in the ledgers. And I said, I just have this. I got a lot of questions, but one I really have is I can't make sense of the numbers. How did this work? And she said, Oh, we go buy a pad, a steno pad, right? A little booklet of from the office supply store, and then I would just use that for the batches and the numbers of the batches. So she had these pre-made tablets, right, lined paper. And she just tabulate the guitars, and then when she got to the end of that tablet of paper, she'd go back to the office supply store and buy some more. And so they were not in numerical order, right? Roughly the way it works with banners is the first banners are 7,000s, the next are 900s, then it goes back to 2 or 3,000. No numerical order. I just thought that was, solved
That's
the
why.
mystery, right?
Yeah.
They didn't care.
That's,
They never thought that someone would care, right? Just didn't
you,
occur to them.
yeah, you see people just pouring. I mean, if you go on any of the groups on Facebook, what's the phone number? As if they're
Right.
going to really be able to decipher that. You probably were the first one to crack that nut. I know the one
Yeah,
that I showed you earlier. Nothing. There's not a number on there. There's no
right.
serial number. There's my best guess is that that it was made in 45. Some of the other characteristics I've been able to determine. Um, wood was in short supply, so you tell some stories of them going to the, I guess what was a supply room, sometimes having to create four-piece tops, which I
Yeah,
always wondered why that happened.
so mid World War II, 1944, everyone was having trouble getting certain woods, right?
Right,
Um, because of blockades and getting shipments of wood. In addition, the red spruce was prized, as we prize it now, the Adirondack spruce,
right.
for its stiffness, right? And it was used in airplane struts and stuff like that. So Gibson was running out of the red spruce or Adirondack spruce. So the top models first kept the Adirondack spruce the longest, but the pieces were small, so you got four-piece tops. Then about mid 1944, Chicago Music Instruments bought Gibson and injected it with some cash, and Gibson was able to buy more wood, but this time it was Sitka. It was just too hard
Mhm.
to get the red spruce. It was being used up. So we have to see a switch to Sitka sometime in 44. Now, I claim if anybody tells you they know exactly when something happened, they're delusional. There's just
Yeah,
no way.
yeah.
But more or less, Gibson, it's just more or less. Yeah, so there were a shortage of woods. So you'll see stacked heels, right? So in the classical style of guitar building, the heel will be a separate piece of wood glued onto the neck part. You
Right.
see that sometimes in World War II. You see wings on the headstock because the piece of wood was too narrow. You'll also see those four-piece tops. The SJ that sent me on this tour, this started me on this journey really, 1944. Um, it has, in addition to those characteristics, the back had cracked in a couple places before it was out of the factory. And so it
Ooh,
has little tiny strips of ebony inlaid where the
wow,
cracks happen under the original finish. So
amazing.
the whole thing is just a fascinating thing. Also, if you look closely at the headstock, the banner was originally affixed a little off center. And so it's reapplied. Gibson painted black over the top of that first banner
Yeah,
and put a new one on so you can see the outline if you have the light just right. So it's just this perfect um, representation of Gibson just scrambling to get instruments out the door, right? Whatever they could find, they just glue it together and send it out the door. And I find that really, well, it's charming, but it's also becomes a piece of cultural history, right? That guitar
Absolutely.
tells an incredible story.
So
Yeah.
these
So
women really didn't understand the quality that they were building at the time. They were just building. Is that correct?
yeah. So at the same time, so I've got all these bits going on, right?
Yeah.
Um, it took me a year and a half or so to get into the ledgers. Um, needed to get everything that mentioned Gibson out of the National Archives. I hired an archivist to get every document, every page that mentioned Gibson. I got 1,500 pages. I had to read through that, the war production orders and stuff like that. But my day job is I'm a law professor. I call it a recovering lawyer. But I also have
Yes.
a joint appointment at the medical school at my university because I also have a master's in public health. And so I got this idea, which I thought was ridiculous at the time, to X-ray and CT scan guitars just to get cool pictures, right?
Yeah.
So I phone up the head of that department, diagnostic imaging. So I got kind of a weird question for you. What is it? Well, I'm hemming and hawing. What's your question? Um, I'd like to X-ray some old vintage guitars from around the era of World War II. Oh, that's really cool. Let's do it. So I sent out the message through the forum, probably the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum, UMGF, and maybe Facebook. I got to figure out what time this was. So I want to X-ray these guitars. And so I get like 40 guitars at my house. I get a dozen just before the war, a dozen just after the war, and a dozen during the war. And I know they're during the war because they have that banner, right? I mean, when the women walked into the factory, that banner, only Gibson's good enough, slapped on there. And when the women leave, it comes back off. And I think there's some meaning to that. What it is, I don't know. But pre and post war, Gibson's sales literature was just amazing. Just exaggeration upon exaggeration, right?
Sure.
This guitar is more beautiful than a Southern Belle. Its tone is more sonorous than a babbling brook. All this shit, right? All
Very
this really fun
flowery
flowery.
marketing language.
And then when the
Yeah.
women are building, it's just good enough. That's it, right? They'll stamped on the headstock, right? So I think there's some meaning to that. But anyway, I can identify them. And so I can measure everything to the 10,000th of whatever you want. And statistically significantly, the women's work was more refined than the work
Mhm.
of men before and after. That is, everything is microscopically thinner, microscopically smoother. Does that make them sound different? I think so, but who knows, right? I'm not remotely objective about these guitars. So I'm thinking, well, how did this happen, right? I didn't think these women got a lot of training. I wasn't sure, right? So I asked the women, all of them, what was your training? What do you mean? Well, who showed you how to do this? Nobody. Well, how did it work? Well, I was sat down. There were enough men left to be bosses. All the bosses were men, and I was told to do what she does, the person next to me. And it makes for some interesting guitars. I'll tell you about one of them. But I'm thinking, how is this possible, right? How could
Yeah.
these guitars then be more refined than the stuff men were doing, right? Some of them who were worthy seasoned craftsmen. How is this possible? And so I asked what were both simultaneously the stupidest two questions and the smartest two questions I've ever asked. So I asked one of these women, well, what did you do in your spare time? What do you mean by spare time, Sonny? These were women, they were born during the Depression. It's World War
Arts
II.
travel. Yeah.
If they're married, they're working full time, taking care of their kids, probably taking care of somebody else's kids, right? Doing without using the coupons to try to get food. They're struggling. They've been struggling their whole lives, right? So I kind of think I recover, and I say, well, did you have any hobbies? It's even dumber, right? Except I recover from the, what do you mean, Sonny? You didn't have time for hobbies kind of response, right? I said, well, did you sew? Oh, yeah. Knit, crochet, needlepoint? Oh, yeah. Right. They did all this stuff. And if you think about Kalamazoo, it was once the capital of celery, world's capital of most celery, but there's lots of farms around Kalamazoo.
I learned
And there's
that from you. Yeah. Yeah.
other manufacturing plants, right? There were pe people made stoves and fishing equipment, stuff like that. So the other people who came into the factory were these lots of farmers. Farmers can do anything, right? They can shoe a horse, fix a barn, build a fence, but it's all gross motor skills. And these women walk in with these fine motor skills, and that's the only explanation. And that part of the book has really spread through historians literature. There's an exhibit on it about it in Spain somewhere. became part of middle school textbooks in Sweden.
Hmm.
That notion, and so just basically stupidity. I got there, stupidity and some perseverance, right? I got this explanation. This incredibly talented workforce walks into the factory just by sheer accident, and I guess the gender roles of the day. Yeah, so the story just keeps getting better for me. I keep just going for it. Yeah, really
But
fun. Just every step of the way.
so you always hear people rave about the quality of bridges on banners, and you can just see that the one of the gals taking a little extra time to polish it up and make sure that it's done properly. And
Yeah,
yeah, that must just be again, not just confined to the Midwest, but that must be a work ethic that went through their entire lives. I see the needlepoint that my grandmother and I think my mother used to do. You and I talked about the packages of patterns that my mom used to buy and make dresses and clothing for my sisters, sitting there at the sewing machine, with the glasses down like this, and probably losing her eyesight doing it. Just it's a convergence of so many factors that have made this run of guitars so popular. And
so
it's not
different.
it's the story, of course, but the quality is significantly better. Anybody that's owned a banner is, I don't think it's not the argument that you get about the quality of the wood really make a difference on an electric guitar, or is it the pickups? It's not that story. To
Yeah,
have the right top and to have all this stuff and really occur by happenstance makes it an
right.
even more fantastic
I think
story.
so. No, I love the story of the bridges. So this book, Gibson's Fabulous Flat Tops, um, talked about the book that said there were a few guitars made during World War II, and they were great because only the seasoned craftsmen were stayed back. And in
Mhm.
particular, the bridges looked like sculpture.
Yeah.
So one of the women I meet with, she built guitars, and I said, "What was your favorite part of making guitars?" She said, "Well, it sounds kind of weird, but it was making the bridges because they could fit in my hand while I was sanding them. I like the smell. If you've ever sanded Brazilian rosewood, it has kind of a sweet smell, and I could just feel it. I like doing that. So I got the explanation, right. This woman just loved that part of guitar building, and made these. They are sculptures.
They
Those
they
banner,
really are. Yeah.
especially the belly down bridges, are so beautifully sculpted. Yeah, really, really interesting. But yeah, just happenstance, the gender roles, women with skills, and there's one woman who just took particular um, pleasure in building those bridges. Yeah, an amazing
She said,
story.
I think she said she liked the smell, but it hurt her nose as well. Rosewood.
Yeah, yeah, she did say that. Yeah.
Um, did any of the women, am I right in saying that some of the women maybe suffered some health issues down the road from working in the factory?
Yeah, so several of them did. They also worked on wartime work, and so they were spray painting parts and stuff like that, and claimed damage to lungs. And I'm confident it's true. One woman in particular, Ruth Stapp. Yeah, I mean, this is pre-OSHA. You're
Sure.
you're
Yeah.
doing toxic work. Well, probably even the guitar work, right? They're spraying finishes with probably no
In,
face masks or that sort of thing. But particularly working on the war work, toxic chemicals and paints and such. Yeah,
we've lost some luthiers of that. The one that comes to mind is Mossman. A direct line from the work that he'd do spraying guitars to
yeah.
yeah. So it very, very interesting. I was surprised to find that Gibson also made wooden toys during that period.
Yeah. So during before the war, during the Depression, in 1929 on,
Yeah,
it's hard to sell a guitar, right? It took a
yeah,
lot of money. So just to keep the doors open, Gibson took the scraps of woods and made little sailboats, little pull toys, little
yeah,
trains, that sort of thing, called Kalamazoo Gal playthings. Kalamazoo playthings. There were a couple. They sold them under then a couple of names, but Kalamazoo
yeah.
playthings. I have never seen one. I know that Frank Ford, who he died within the last few years at Griffin Music in the San Francisco Bay Area, he had a
Right.
sailboat. And I used to have for many years, I had on eBay a search going that would notify me if
Sure.
anything
Yeah.
turned up. And I've never seen, I've only seen photographs of Franks. I haven't seen any others, but they certainly did. And one of the women I interviewed was the daughter of one of the executives, the number two guy. And it was really interesting talking to her. She led this privileged life, and the other women were just, blue collar workers. But she got the toys. Her dad would bring them home just because he had, after become privileged, he had a
Yeah.
privilege taking toys home. But none of the other women got the toys
You
freely
no
for
longer,
themselves or for their kids.
she no longer had them.
She didn't have them. No, she
I
tossed
did
them years ago.
after I read the book. That's of course what I did. I went on eBay to see whether, there were any collectible toys, and lot from that period, but nothing from the Gibson factory.
I know. I would still want to. I've reached the age where I don't really want more stuff, but I would love it.
Right.
I do have a couple of. I have one really a significant, I think, memento from the factory. I have some chunks of wood
Yeah.
from World War II era. So
Wow.
there was it was a dentist in Kalamazoo who was an amateur woodworker, and he died many years ago, but he got scraps of wood during the war period and just stashed them away, and then started making stuff. So I have a bowl that he turned. He glued
Mm.
together these scraps. He's got rosewood and spruce and whatever else, so maybe some ebony, different colors, um, from World War II wood. And I've got a couple of bits of maple from World War II. So I got a few scraps out of the factory. I tell you, I have this one extraordinary regret. So Gibson left Kalamazoo in mid 80s, 1984. The employees who didn't want to move with Gibson to Nashville. Gibson moved from Michigan to Nashville to Tennessee to avoid unions. Right, Tennessee
Mm.
was a free work state, and so
Right.
they could get rid of the unions. And the guys, they're almost all guys, they're all guys by then, who didn't want to go, stayed back. And Gibson
Smart.
sold the fixtures at a public auction. They bought all the fixtures, right? Um, and that became Heritage Guitars. And then a decade ago or so, a property development company and another well-heeled person bought the building and moved Heritage to a building to the side of the original big building, and started renovations. And the story was it's going to become a Hard Rock hotel. The investor in the company at the time owned 51% of Rolling Stone, since sold it. But anyway, in during the renovation, I asked, there were linoleum squares in the bathroom, the women's bathroom, pockmarked with heel marks of people
Oh
wearing
my
high
God.
heels and leaning back against the wall to smoke a cigarette. And
For,
I said, if you ever when you get to the point where you're going to renovate this part, please save one of those squares of linoleum for me. But it wasn't there. But that's a regret.
that would have
So the
really been.
building, yeah, it wouldn't have meant anything to anybody else. But yeah, well,
No, of
I
course
would have
not.
treasured it. I would have framed it and treasured
You
it.
still would have put
Genuine.
it on that. You would have put up on that bookshelf behind you, though. You know that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Now go
I
ahead.
have
I'm
a
sorry.
shrine to the Kalamazoo Gals down in my kitchen. I should have done this with the shrine behind me. I've got that wooden turn bowl, a couple scraps of
Yeah.
wood. I've got one of those E for excellent pins that
Oh,
all the
very cool.
employees. Someone found on eBay and sent it to me for free.
Yeah.
I've got paraphernalia that the women I interviewed given me, that sort of thing. So I do have a shrine to the whole that whole part of my life. Uh,
So that talking about the bowl, the turned wood bowl reminds me of something that I don't think is even in schools today, but wood shop. You
yeah,
had to have,
yeah,
you went at my school in LA, believe it or not, you had wood shop, you had electrical, and of course I made my salt and pepper shakers and I had to combine pieces of wood, and I didn't have a future as a luthier because they're crooked.
right. Well, I mean, we could go a long conversation on, I think that in our country, the devaluation of craft, right? I
Yeah,
think that's a shame. And
brother.
I think it explains a lot of stuff going on that portions of our society stop valuing that kind of work. And I think it's hurt us
Yeah.
in lots of ways. Um,
The lurch to a
but
service industry oriented country
yeah,
is
yeah,
not a good thing for us.
yeah, yeah.
Did you did tell one story about going back to the factory with one of the gals, and kind of she revisiting the ghost of the factory.
Yeah.
And then Heritage wasn't all that helpful in allowing you to go in and investigate, were they? Which
They've
is
been more
interesting.
helpful since this time. Right. So I went to been to Kalamazoo probably 20 times by now, maybe more.
Right.
But during the writing of the book, I went back several times. And one time I took one of the gals, Irene, who's the most willing and the healthiest.
Yeah.
And she's now almost 104. She's still healthy. But anyway, I wanted to just go back, walk through the building with her, which was just, it was a stunning thing.
Yeah.
What was here, what was there. The building's pretty much, the, torn out. The insides have been gutted, right? But she could stand places. Um, but at the time, Heritage was still building guitars where Gibson built guitars.
Right.
And I wanted to go tour and I wanted to take Irene there. And I phoned Heritage and Heritage says, no, we won't do it. We only do it on Fridays or whatever, every other Friday or every one Friday a month, something like that. We're not doing
Yeah.
it. I said, well, I've got one of those women who worked during World War II. I'm going to bring her. I said, no, wait, no, no, thank you. So I decided I was just going to show up with this lovely old woman and just ask to go in. So I do that, right? And they couldn't turn her down with her there in person. Now, a couple wild things. One is that at that time, the fixtures were all the original fixtures, and it did not look like that building had been cleaned since it had been open. There was
Wow.
piled dust everywhere. And some of the old 20s and 30s machines were just pushed back against the wall. They're still there. All the World War II stuff was there. There's a clamping machine that looks like kind of like it's a wheel, like a big wagon wheel, where you clamp the top and then pull it up the next arms, you clamp it. It has a date on it of 1902. It's just amazing, right? So Heritage was building in that base at that time. They've since moved to the side with this hope of renovating the building. I don't know, but yeah, it was interesting. The Heritage, they just weren't they weren't cooperative. I mean, not so. I could have been the mayor of Kalamazoo, maybe. Kalamazoo has hosted several Kalamazoo Gal events. At one point, some years ago, Kalamazoo closed down the city center for Kalamazoo Gals Day, and were musicians on every street corner, with women musicians from Michigan.
Yeah.
I got to pick them, suggest it, and you could just walk through. And then the whole event culminated at a kind of a divey bar, old dog tavern, place I like. I played on that stage many times for a jam session, open mic, if you will, with some of my Banner Gibsons. And it's going to be filmed by the local television station, the CBS affiliate or the ABC affiliate. It's a big deal. And so I say to Heritage, we're going to do this and we're going to walk through town, visit all these musicians, end up at the Old Dog. And so it'd be really great if we came by the factory. And the head of Heritage says, well, we close at 4:30 on Fridays and you're not going to be here till 4:45. I said, but this is history, and you're going to get good promotional value. He said, "No, we close at 4:30." Wouldn't do it anyway.
Wow.
Amazing. I'm
Well,
giving you free press.
yeah, you've become kind of a one-man booster for Kalamazoo, have you not? I mean,
Well,
you kind of,
I sort of think so.
yeah.
When this woman Irene turned 100, I was
Hmm.
going to host a birthday party for her at the Old Dog Tavern, right?
Very
And
nice.
got it all set up, but the pandemic descended on us,
Mhm.
so I couldn't do that. But I did the best I could. And you can search on YouTube at my channel, John Thomas Guitar, and you can see the virtual 100th birthday, where I think it's 125 musicians from around the planet to record Happy Birthday, including
Oh, isn't that great?
Roseanne
Oh my
Cash
God.
is there, Tommy Emmanuel, Waddy
Yeah.
Wachtel, and just people from around the planet. But anyway, it goes back to the Kalamazoo's booster. I got the mayor of Kalamazoo with my friend Jennifer Hudson Prenkert. We still working together. She was probably the bigger pusher on this. We got the mayor of Kalamazoo to declare that day Irene Stearns Day, her birthday, in perpetuity. And Governor Gretchen Whitmer to sign a proclamation declaring that
Wow.
Irene Stearns Day. So yeah, I mean it's been I pushed, but I've gotten some very willing helpers in Kalamazoo. People like the story. Kalamazoo likes the story. I mean, my only problem when I go to Kalamazoo is so many people want to jam with me that I sometimes don't
Yeah.
sleep at all. There,
Yeah.
I can't. It's a few years ago. Staying up all night hurts too much these days for days. But There were times when I stay at the Kalamazoo House, musicians would join, and there were times when I would jam all night, pack up my guitar, and go to the airport and fly home. Um, yeah, so I've become I don't know if a booster. I'm a familiar face, whether you like it or not. I'm a familiar face in Kalamazoo.
Now, do you travel with your SJ there? You still?
I travel these days. That SJ hasn't traveled much lately. I have traveled with
Mhm.
that SJ. I travel with I have six banners. Now I should have bought more because banners became much more valuable after my book was published.
Yeah, right. Of course.
And I would get people would approach me to try to sell me guitars. And so if they were dealers or sophisticated members of the vintage guitar world, we could just negotiate a price if I wanted it. But if they were
Sure.
just somebody, if it was grandpa's guitar was in a closet, we just
Like
thought
the
maybe we
local
should sell it to
stories.
you.
Yeah.
I don't, I say, if I want it, I have to go get it appraised either by George Green or Walter Carter.
Right.
I think Walter may not be in the business anymore, but, and then I'll either pay that or nothing. I'm not going to pay more than that, but I'm not going to pay less than that. I just
Right.
didn't want to be that guy who has this information, who discovers the $50,000 guitar at the neighbor's tag sale and pays 500 for it. Didn't want that on me, right? But I do have six guitars. Two of them are the only two banners I've been able to document went to World War II. One is an SJ that a soldier took to the European battlefront, and it just looks and feels and smells like it lived in Foxville.
Yeah. Old
It's an
wood.
amazing guitar. And then the other one, a young sailor took it to the Pacific. Now it is number two in the first known batch of banners. So it is the oldest banner, the second banner ever shipped. And I travel with those, sometimes with both of them, or at least one of them. And because they went to the war, and I just
Yeah.
hand them around. Now the went to war SJ, I got the others in LG too. The sailor's guitar is in LG too. The went to war SG I've had a lot longer. And pre-pandemic, still working on a project, refugee children. And I took that guitar to refugee camps in Europe and gave guitar lessons. And I would just lean it up against the wall or a tree and
Yeah.
say, even if you don't play guitar, I think you should hold this because it helped liberate the world during troubled times, and we got
Yeah.
troubled times now. So I've taken those guitars all over the world, and of course, that one battered SJ, one little guitar maker named Jeff Beck played it. So I put it in pretty interesting people's hands.
So, which nice segue, because I wanted to ask you, one of my favorite videos is in stories, I guess I'd love for you to tell, is that you played at world famous Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club. It's in London, correct?
Yeah.
In London. And lo and behold, there's Jeff Beck. Was that happenstance? Was that put together ahead of time?
So,
Please tell that story.
well, yeah, it wasn't put together by me. So, the BBC did an hour-long radio documentary on Kalamazoo Gals shortly after the book was published,
Mhm.
and flew me to London. I got to be in BBC studios. My daughter was a huge fan of Doctor Who. Was very jealous that I got to
Yeah,
be in the studio. Um, and Susie Quattro, the great rock
yeah,
and roll bassist,
yeah.
who was popular in the 70s and 80s. She was the host, the interviewer in the podcast, the hour-long radio documentary. Probably today we would call it an hour-long podcast, but
Right,
that word did not exist yet, right?
right,
And
right.
so somehow I had met, I had, this is the story. So Beck had played Clapton's Crossroads Festival in Madison Square Garden in New York City within the 6 months or year preceding that, right? And I covered it for Fretboard Journal. And one of the great things about writing for Fretboard Journal is I get press passes. So I got to
Yeah,
go to the
sure.
Crossroads. And Beck is playing on stage, and he's got this brilliant violin player. And I'm asking all the other press people, who is that? No one else cares. Like, they don't care. They just want to talk about Clapton. Everybody else, they're waiting for Clapton. No one cares about the violin player. So I Google her, and I find a name, and I put up an article that night. I think it was a 2 or 3 day event, whatever it was. I put up an article each time with my photographs and interviews. I could interview some of the players, um, and I misidentified her. It was a different, brilliant, beautiful blonde violin player. And so I post this on the Fretboard Journal's webpage, and I get an email the next morning, like, who the hell reads this stuff, right? She said, that's not me. You got the wrong name for the violinist. So she tells me her violin, Lizzie had come to me, Anyway, her name. And so I tell her, I'd love to hand you a book. I'm coming to London for this BBC thing. And she happens to be doing something at Ronnie Scott's that one of the nights I'm there. She said, well, come down and play a song at Ronnie Scott's and maybe tell a little bit of the story, right? So my favorite electric guitar performance of all time is Jeff Beck live at Ronnie Scott's.
Yeah.
If you haven't watched
Yeah.
this thing, it's that pulling this, he pulling the tones out of this guitar. It's just unbelievable. And he's a hero of mine forever. So
Yep.
anyway, so I get to play the same stage, right? I'm pretty jazzed about it. And I walk up that night. I got my whole family's there. My kids thought I was cool for about 10 minutes. And I guess I'm going to go and get set up or whatever. A whole bunch of musicians are going to play. The musicians who are, it's called classical kicks. These are
Yeah.
musicians who play classical music, but also pop and rock. And some of them are from the Royal Philharmonic, right? So I am the worst musician from a long shot. Anyway, I come in and the manager says, "Oh, Jeff's coming to see you tonight." I said, Jeff who? Jeff Beck." So they've reserved a spot for him in the front row. Like,
Oh
holy
my
moly.
God.
What I always tell people is I was wearing dark clothing, so you couldn't tell whether I
Yeah.
soiled myself. Um, um, and my daughter videoed it, and it's on my YouTube channel. It's got, I don't know, 100,000 hits or something. But I got to play in front of Jeff Beck, and then afterward, and he said to me, now you can't prove it because he's dead. He said to me,
Yeah.
"Great job." My kids heard him say that. Anyway, uh,
Believe it.
then we spent, I don't know, a couple hours thereabouts, passing that guitar back and forth. That went to World War II SJ back and forth, just sitting at the green room in Ronnie Scott's. Just one of these pinch me nights. Like, this is unbelievable. Yeah, so that was a wild, wild event. And
So
the people
they
play that
say,
guitar.
yeah, so they say you're not supposed to ever meet your guitar heroes because you'll be disappointed. They'll be rude. They might be offish. What was he like?
He was charming. He wasn't effusive. He was
Yeah.
very nice, nice to
Yeah.
my kids, posed with my kids.
Hmm.
He was very nice. But you could tell what he really wanted was to get his hands on that guitar. He's talking to me,
Nice.
but his eyes keep dropping down, looking at that guitar, right? So he
Yeah.
was nice to me, but he wanted to play that guitar, and he did tell me it was the best acoustic he'd ever played. But he would have said that anyway. No, he was really
Yeah.
nice. He wasn't trying to be my buddy. Um,
Yeah.
uh, my daughter got a video of him playing that guitar, and I put it up on YouTube. And the next day, I got a message from his manager said, "Take it down. Jeff didn't want that up there. Playing acoustic guitar." Like, who the hell knows what I put on YouTube? Um, and I think I'd lost that little snippet in a hard drive
Not
crash.
too
But
bad because
anyway,
you could probably put it back up now,
yeah,
right?
I know. But anyways, it was a really extraordinary night. And yeah, this story has put me in the company of, James Burton, Vince Gill,
Oh man.
Emily Salyers, just lots of Waddy Wachtel, lots of players. It's been
Yeah.
really fun for me to travel the world with that. I'm out in 2 weeks' time. It'll be Friday, October 24th. I think it's pretty much 2 weeks' time. Um, and I'm going to host an event with that guitar at McCabe's Guitar Shop in Santa Monica. It just
Where I
was
grew
part
up.
of LA.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And if you go on the website and look at who's played there, it's a
Oh my
who's who,
God. Are
right?
you kidding? Who I
Crosby,
saw
Stills, and
there?
Nash, Joni
Yeah.
Mitchell, Clapton, everybody. So I get to be on that stage. I I have this line, and it's true. If you want to see the person who the worst guitar player to play on stage, or the distance between the talent of the guitar player and the reputation of the venue, I win that contest hands down. It's been so much
Now,
fun. Yeah.
I may have to take a little trip out there, tell the wife I've got business.
You should come on out.
McCabe,
My
McCabe's
my, my
is,
little my documentary film, short documentary with my film partner, a guy named David Master, did a brilliant job.
right,
Is showing at two film festivals that weekend,
in
and
LA.
it's screening the same day. Yeah, one's called the Awareness Film Festival, which is a sort of a social awareness film festival.
Yeah.
Both really highly regarded. The other was LA's documentary film festival called Doc LA. Um, and it's showing both those festivals at the same time on the same night. The two festivals don't know about this, right? Um, but we have to create separate posters. But anyway, and so that's on Saturday night, the 25th. On October 24th, I do the McCabe's thing. And the
Outstanding.
day before that, I meet with the people who want to turn this book into a real movie. So it should be a fun time. Yeah.
You, you know what? I know you have your own podcast. These things go by too quickly. I think I covered a lot of ground with you, but I always, and I told you this earlier, I really like the backstories. The backstories mean so much to me. And I'll watch somebody that I'm interviewing, I'll watch their eyes light up because they're expecting a typical range of questions. That it's almost like the movie stars that go on a press tour
Yeah.
and they act surprised by the questions, but they've answered them a million times. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you'll come back.
Well, of
You've
course I
been one of
enjoy this.
my wife, and I tell this all the time. My wife likes to define what are friends. Are they real friends or are they Facebook friends? And the truth is, there isn't much great to talk about when it comes to Facebook, but it's reconnecting with your old friends and it's making some new friends. And I consider you a friend. We've talked a
I do
lot through
too.
the years,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thank you so much. You've been very generous with your
My
time.
pleasure.
Stay off of stay on the bike, but be careful and watch the
Right.
deer. Okay.
Right.
And
Yeah.
thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for caring about Kalamazoo Gals. I tell that to everybody. Just thank you for caring. It's a
Can you? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
story that's warmed my heart, and I like to see it warm other people's hearts. Yeah.
It definitely, I had tears in my eyes knowing that some of those women did not live long enough to see the fruits of your labor. And, but
Yeah.
I'm an old softy, so things like that make me tear up. Can you stay on for just a second? I'm going to end the recording. I just wanted to ask a
Sure.
couple questions if I could.
Sure.
Very much. Again, thank you, John Thomas. If you haven't read it, if you haven't seen the documentary, which by the way was narrated by Susie Quattro, was that correct?
That's the radio documentary. The film documentary is mainly it's me, but it's
Okay.
Tommy Emmanuel does a long star turn
Yeah,
on it.
which was a great
Um,
performance there. I loved it.
yeah, yeah. So it's 16 minutes and 51 seconds of your life you never get back. But we've won a lot of awards with it. My film partner and I. We end our film festival circuit in Paris on December 1st, where we've won Best Short Documentary at Cine Paris Film Festival.
It's a
There's
terrific. Yeah,
Thank you. Once we finish the film festival circuit, I'm going to put it up on the Kalamazoo Gals website. There's already a movie tab on kalamazoogals.com where you can
right.
see the trailer, and I've listed where we have appeared, where we're going to appear, and what awards we've won. But I'm going to make it available to the public for free.
And talk about empowering women. You did it at a guitar store that was owned
Yeah,
by a couple of females, and God bless you, brother.
that was planned.
For a guy that had
That was
two
planned.
daughters and two sisters, I can tell you, we need to support them a lot more. Do we not?
Well, that was planned. I can say I got a gig to
Nice
talk
touch.
about this at Americana Fest. And I went
Yeah,
to Americana Fest and I wanted to interview people. I walked around with the Banner Gibson, finding people that didn't look like me, and asked them if
yep.
they want to play the guitar, and then did the most of the interviews in the women-owned Fanny's House of Music in
Panties. That's
Nashville. A
it.
great, great shop.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I planned that out. I thought I'm going to take
nice
advantage
touch.
of this Americana Fest gig. It was
Yeah,
really, yeah, really good.
nice touch,
Cool.
brother. Um,
Thank you.
hold on,
My
and
pleasure to be
thank
on
you
here. My
again.
privilege and pleasure. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and please, everybody, get the book. It's wonderful, and watch the documentary if you get a chance. Both are very, very touching, and what a great historical document to leave us all with. So thank you very much. Okay,
My pleasure.
bear with me.